We want internet freedom. We want our internet to stay the same, and we want control over it, and we want control over it. We're here discussing internet freedom and who has control over the internet. Now, this is an issue that is not being talked about too much, and I think that there's a lot of foggy area in this, so we're going to try to get through some of that fog and see what the real issues here are. But before we go into this, it's worth pointing out that back in June, on the 8th and the 9th, there were two bills proposed to Congress, one in Congress and one in the Senate, and one in the House. And you're seeing those bills right now, and they are directly towards the Commerce Department of Government. One started by Ted Cruz, one started by Sean Duffy, and both say they want to protect internet freedom. So what does that mean? What is the protection of internet freedom? Who's going to take over the internet? I bring in Margaret Howell. Now, Margaret, what are the issues here? Who's trying to take over the internet, and why are we trying to protect its freedom?
Well, as you pointed out to me earlier today on C-SPAN, and we've suffered through it and watched it for you, the droning on to catch snippets of truth from them. And what we saw today was this one Republican Wisconsin congressman, Jim Sensenbrenner. I doubt you've ever even heard of him. I hadn't prior to today, but he's on the floor screaming, "You're about to lose your freedom." He lays it out. He says the Department of Commerce is set to finalize a transition that the Obama administration is pushing forward on September the 30th. I'm going to just read you a snippet. I was trying to write down and transcribe what he was screaming on the floor because nobody is getting this. We don't understand. He's about to hand over control to an international body, a body of people that do not share our values, our ideology, or our love for free speech, mind you. We're talking about countries, of course. ICANN, China and Iran are both in ICANN. So by handing this over to the UN, he's effectively handing over our free speech to China and Iran. And how they're doing this, so the U.S., we currently control our own domain names. So, for example, .mil and .gov, those are government official websites. We have control over those domains. So what the president is trying to do is give the internet control over to this international body. So in theory, we could have a major national security crisis on our hands if we've got Iran, for example, controlling the .mil and the .gov, those aspects of our internet freedom. Now, free speech is at the core and the very heart, the function of the internet. It exists to provide people with free speech and information. We know that there's crap on the internet. All of us have to deal with it and stomach it. But a lot of the time, we see the court of public opinion policing that. We don't see an international body, for example, like China, that would be policing this. And what we found out in this report, the facilities in the event that the internet control is handed over to China, for example, this is what one senator had to say about it. It would be housed, the control would be housed in the same building as the agency responsible for censoring the country's internet. They've uncovered that ICANN's Beijing office is actually located within the same building as the Cyberspace Administration of China, which is the central agency within the Chinese government censorship regime. So we're handing over control, for example, to Iran because apparently our president didn't give them enough money. He hasn't bought them off a nut. We have got to actually give them the entire lock, stock, and barrel. Let's give them our free speech as well. And unless they stop this is going to take place next week. We have this little know-nothing congressman on the floor screaming to a blank audience. Not a single seat in that audience was filled. And we're here to tell you about it because it's so important. People don't understand. We could have Iran controlling our internet freedom and what we say and do. Oh, and by the way, also our government websites.
And I think it's a major issue. It's strange how it's being brushed under the rug, kind of. It's not being talked about too much on the mainstream news networks. And it's a big issue. I think a lot of people would really react emotionally to thinking that their internet freedom might be taken away, considering how much time you spend on there, considering how much social interaction goes on there. considering how much people rely on it just for their everyday lives. So this is something that I think could get a lot of momentum if people knew what was going on. But the problem is there are other issues going on, obviously, you know, terror attacks and racial strife and all that. And that kind of, I think, is what's burying this debate. But, you know, it appears to me that this is more of Barack Obama siphoning away power from the United States towards an international power structure. And that seems to be what's going on, as you just illustrated, and we're right on the heels of it.
That's exactly what's happening, Owen, and it's infuriating to me. You know, this gets me so fired up because what they've done, they've tried to make it too smart for you. You're not supposed to be able to understand it or question it because it's just way over your head, but we're here to break it down for you. And basically, in theory, the only thing that could stop this would be Congress suing if this administration is successful in pushing it through because it transfers power. Now, they're saying it's not necessarily illegal, but this is one of his final pushes before he leaves office. This is what was being reiterated to a blank audience, an empty audience on the Hill today. So he's saying this, and I want to continue on. The administration, meaning Obama, has expressed a desire to finish it before he leaves office. And currently we have this multi-stakeholder model, lots of shareholders of the power of the internet right now, and our own country controls what we say and do. Well, that would be no more under this. Plain and simply put, ICANN would control it, the UN would control it, and regimes that do not share a love or passion for free speech would then be able to censor it and also create national security risks because they would have control over U.S. domain names, even government U.S. domain names.
And there's a contract right now that deems the current control of the internet a legal monopolist because it has instrumentally functions of government. And I can see this in the future, Barack Obama using that phrase, monopoly, as an attack on the current control of the internet. And before he does that, I want to point out, Barack, that your healthcare system has created a monopoly in many states. So it's funny how you'll be anti-monopoly on the internet, but not on healthcare. But we'll see if he plays that angle. Americans for Limited Government received a response to its FOIA Act and a request for all records relating to legal and policy analysis concerning antitrust issues for the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, ICANN. And the response they got was there was conducted a thorough search for responsive records within its possession and control and found no records responsive to your request. So it's like, I mean, what are we really dealing with here? As you said, there's a lot of confusion. I think this will go over the heads of most Americans. I'll be perfectly honest. It's tough for me, someone who's obsessed with this stuff every day, to completely grasp what's going on here. But I think it's very important that we try to figure out what's going on. We as Americans stand up for our right to free speech on the internet, and we need to know how that might be siphoned off if we hand control over to a UN agreement, which is where it looks like it's going.
That's absolutely where it's going. So I mentioned that Congress could in fact sue to keep this from happening, and I encourage you, if you are so inclined, please contact your member of Congress because they have a certain amount of power over this still. And in the event that the Obama administration pushes this through, Congress can pass legislation to prohibit the federal government from using your tax money to allow the transition, so they can halt it with the power of the purse. That's one way of stopping this, by not allowing Obama to federally fund it with your tax money. There's a coalition of 25 advocacy groups, including Americans for Tax Reform, Heritage Action. They sent a letter to Congress making this exact point, and we're seeing, these last-ditch efforts from people like this Wisconsin congressman to get on the floor to an empty audience and say, hey, look, this is about to happen. We have to stop it. He's screaming. We're screaming on his behalf for him, Owen, and people need to understand that the way to stop this, there's a push that's happening. It's set to happen next week if Congress doesn't intervene. It's plain and simple.
And Ted Cruz is one of the leaders of this right now. We've been hard on Ted in the past, but I have to salute Ted for his effort right now to keep internet freedom in America, at least with the bills that he's sponsored. So, as you just highlighted, Margaret, we've seen some of the political actions that are being taken. I'm curious, when are we going to start seeing social actions? Are we ever going to see the American people speak out about this? You know, we live in a very polarized environment right now in this country, but I think this is something that all Americans can find common ground on. Of all ages, of all races, of all creeds, of all colors, we can find common ground in the fact that we want internet freedom. We want our internet to stay the same, and we want control over it because we have a passion for free speech.